Hello, everyone. Welcome. It is just after 5:05 Eastern Time. My name is Andrew Lawton, a fellow with the True North Initiative. And whether you are enjoying a lovely day at 2:05 on the West Coast, perhaps you're enjoying some Alberta weather, which apparently right now is pretty darn terrible at 3:05 or whatever time it is everywhere else. Newfoundland is always the fun one because what are we in Newfoundland right now? We're 6:35 because they always have to throw us off with the half-hour time zone there. Wherever it is for you tuning in, hope you're having a great day. And also a very happy new year to you all. This is my first Facebook Live of 2019, and that has zero significance whatsoever, except that because New Year's is apparently a spectacular occasion, we're always supposed to talk about the fact that it's New Year's. I think I saw one person share online a couple of hours ago that we only have to wish people a Happy New Year for another 4 days. So after January 7th, we're all supposed to just move on, accept that it's 2019, and hope for the best. But I do hope you have a very, very wonderful New Year season, just as I hope you had a wonderful Christmas season. And whether you have any New Year's resolutions or not is kind of playing into this. I'm kind of the New Year's Grinch, just as a fair warning. I don't pay attention much to New Year's, and I don't have any New Year's resolutions, but I do every now and then kind of look forward to the year ahead and say, all right, what do I hope the politicians' New Year resolutions are? And the problem is every year it's pretty much the same list. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that this year and give a bit of a primer, as I think a lot of people are looking at the election year as now being in full force because, well, we're going to be headed to the polls nationally in just under 10 months, which means there is the question of where the priorities for politicians really are. And the one element of this that I find to be fascinating is when you look at debt. There was a report that came out just a day or so ago from CIBC, the bank, and they looked at Canadians and their financial priorities. And the poll found that for the 9th consecutive year, the number one financial priority for Canadians and their households is paying down debt. So when you look at the numbers on this, I'll pull up the little chart here. 26% of Canadians say it's their top financial priority, keeping up with bills and saving for vacation, growing wealth, saving for retirement. These are all way behind. So the top priority every year, 26% say paying down debt. Now, in fairness, the top priority is typically losing weight. That's like the number one New Year's resolution. As you can tell, I've been failing for several years at that. But paying down debt when it comes to non-weight loss is typically the number one priority, and certainly for financial goals, the number one. And it really struck me as interesting here to see how much of a divide there is between the goals and realities that Canadians make for themselves and have for themselves and the goals and priorities for politicians. And why this is so interesting is that a government is supposed to be, a democratically elected government anyway, is supposed to be a reflection of the people it serves. So if you have people that are saying we support X, Y, Z, and government saying we support manganese, hydrogen, boron, then there's clearly a gap there. And we see this time and time again, and we certainly see it on anything financial. And that's where I wanted to start off here. So let me ask you point blank. I mean, is this something that you had in your own life? Well, for starters, let's do a fun one here. I'm going to put up a poll. Did you make any New Year's resolutions? We know the politicians typically don't. If you made a New Year's resolution, let me know in the poll box there, just to have a little bit of fun with this. But the fact remains that for politicians in Canada, they are looking at let me pull up the exact numbers now because this is as far as 2017 goes. We had $631.9 billion in debt. So $631.9 billion in debt, which if you look at the percentage of GDP is 31.2%. So we have a GDP of 2.03 trillion or something like that. Debt makes up just shy of 1/3 of our GDP. And if you look at that percentage has kind of fluctuated over the years. Obviously, when you go back over the last 10 years, we had some skyrocketing debt to GDP as you look at the response to the recession and the spending that Harper put in that period of 2008, 2009. But these numbers are not small numbers. But the problem is it's such an abstract number for so many people. They don't understand the implications of it. They don't really care about the implications of it. And in their own household, you don't have that option. And this is where I wanted to really merge these two topics. In Canadians' own households, debt reduction has to be a priority because you can't keep debt at those levels. You can't have a debt that's 33% of your net worth, not pay it down, keep adding to it, and expect that you're not going to have to pay the piper at some point down the road. But what I find so fascinating about this discussion is that Canadians don't actually seem to care when it comes to voting. And this is something that I saw firsthand. Many of you know I ran as a candidate in Ontario's election back in June. And my team and I knocked on, it was actually 21,000 doors in the span of about 6 weeks, which we're so very proud of it. And you'd always want to, when you're meeting people, find out if they're supporting you, yeah. But you want to find out the issues that they care about. And we did this. We did this a fair bit. We would ask people, you know, what do you care about headed into the election? And I'd say the number one answer, you know, hydro rates was a big one in Ontario, but the number one answer was either hydro rates or I care about debt or government spending. And when I heard this, I was so pleased because I'd never been a candidate before. So I'm knocking on someone's door. They're a complete stranger. I have no idea what they care about. And I say, all right, what do you care about? And they say, oh, I care about government spending. And I'm like, all right, I'm the conservative candidate. This person will vote for me. And you get talking to them further, and you find out that a lot of these people will say, I might vote NDP, I might vote Liberal, I might vote Conservative. And you say, okay, well, just so you know, the Conservatives are the only party that are saying we want to reduce spending, and the Liberals and NDP are saying we want more spending. And, well, the fact that I'm doing this and not right now sitting in Queen's Park tells you that all of these people that said government spending was a priority, when push comes to shove, don't actually vote based on that issue. And I do wonder why we see people so abstractly looking at government issues in a way that they can't and don't have the luxury of doing with their own. And it brings to mind that old Margaret Thatcher quote, and this isn't verbatim, I'm paraphrasing here, but she says, you know, if you can't run a household, how could you ever dream of running a country? And I think those are so true. And same as when we talk about running a business versus running government. Obviously, there are differences, but the idea of getting value for money, the idea of trimming the fat, the idea of not having unsustainable debt levels, these are universal things in your household, in a business, that should be there in government as well. And they're not. For lawmakers, they're not, and also for voters, they're not. So I do wonder why that is. When you go back to 21,000 doors that you knock on and people that say, yes, I care about government spending, one of the things that I fear is that people say it because they want to sound smart. It does make you sound smart. If some politician knocks on your door, you don't know they're coming, you're too busy, you know, mowing the lawn or whatever, and they say, what do you care about? Nah, government spending, debt. Yeah, that sounds like a real issue. It's the same as this one thing that happens in the US. I don't know if it still happens, but used to, where PBS would score in surveys like extraordinarily high, and NPR would score extraordinarily high because everyone, when they're asked in a survey, what do you read or what do you listen to or what do you watch? They say, oh, I watch PBS, and oh, I watch NPR. But when you look at the metrics, people aren't doing it because they just want to sound smart by saying it. And I think in Canada, you'd see the same thing with CBC or you know, whatever the equivalent of it is for newspaper. I mean, the Globe and Mail, I guess. Like everyone would say, oh, I read the Globe and I watch CBC. But they're just doing it because they want to sound smart to a pollster or to a politician. And the debt problems in Canada have gotten so monumentally large that no one even really cares about it anymore because they don't think it impacts them. And whenever I encountered this, the line that I would use, which is not an original thought by any stretch, is, okay, well, you know, let's put it in practical terms. You know, in Ontario's case, Ontario is the largest subnational borrower anywhere in the world, $300 and some odd billion in debt. It is the third largest line item in the provincial budget in Ontario, debt and interest payments after healthcare and education. And you'd say to people, all right, if debt is taking up X percentage of the budget. That's money that's not going towards special needs. That's money that's not going towards healthcare and education, money that's not going towards roads, policing, all of these things. And people do get it. People do get it, but when push comes to shove, don't see how directly it impacts them. And this is something that is not a liberal issue by any stretch. I mean, Justin Trudeau, we'll talk about very shortly, has certainly been incredibly dishonest on this. But Stephen Harper was hardly a superstar when it came to spending. Like, I'm looking right now at the federal debt from 2008 onward. And we went from, not a single year debt went down, by the way, but starting at $457.6 billion in 2008, that was when Stephen Harper got his majority government, to now we're at $616 billion. So $616 billion, which is an increase that is quite substantial. And most importantly, we're looking, and that's, by the way, based on an adjusted for inflation number. If you go 515.3 to where we are today. So if you look at inflation, it's still a significant increase, though not as significant as the actual dollar value. But again, the way that we look at these numbers as political wonks, as the diehards, for me, people in media, is different than the way the average voter does. They're concerned about services. And when you look right now at what's happening in the US with a shutdown that I think is 12 or 14 days in, something like that, that is actually giving people a real world understanding of what happens when government spends beyond its means, when ultimately you don't have money in the budget, so you actually flip the lights off. And I actually wish that we had in Canada something analogous to a government shutdown, because first off, shutdowns are a great way to save money. I'm not saying I like impasses like that, but when the government is shut down, and you can see in the US just how many billions of dollars are being spent, it's like, oh, it's not the best way to do it, but I'll take it. In Canada, I think we'd see something very similar, where first off, we'd start to realize how many government services we can live without. And that was true when Canada Post went on strike. I think if CBC were to go on strike, I'd be like, yeah, that's fine. Keep them on strike. I'm okay with it. But actually, for Canadians, these things are only as justifiable as they are relatable. And I would love for a politician to actually take the debt issue on, but do it in a way that Canadians start to understand it and drive home the importance of it. And I don't know how to do that, because no one has succeeded in doing it. I mean, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation has a great little initiative it does with the debt clock. They, have a clock on a flatbed, I think, and they just drive it around the country, and you can look at the debt clock, and it's pretty much in real time racking up the numbers. And something like that, I think, is great because it gives you a visualization of it. But the media gives it so little coverage. The media doesn't care about debt, which admittedly is kind of a boring issue. And I'm going to put another poll question up asking if debt sways how you vote. And just so you know, when you vote, I don't see who voted how. I only see the number. So it's completely anonymous, I believe. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to call you stupid, because I don't think people are stupid if debt doesn't sway how they vote. But I am curious to know if it sways how you vote. I mean, as far as the issues that you are concerned about, whether it's free speech or the environment or taxes or whatever, does government debt sway how you vote? That's the question that I would ask. And for a lot of people, my experience is that they say it does, but when push comes to shove, it's not the ballot issue for them. But it really is one of the issues from which all other issues flow. And even let's look at immigration. Immigration is one of the most pivotal issues in Canada right now. I think it will be a ballot issue in the 2019 election, this year's election. And certainly I hope it will be a ballot issue this year. But let's say that immigration is the focal point. And for the next however long it takes for me to go through this, it is. We have a security risk that comes from immigration. We have an issue of Canadian values that comes from, and I'm talking about unrestricted, open borders, Justin Trudeaupian immigration. There's the security risk. There is the integrity of our borders issue. There's also the concern about taxing of government resources. And that issue comes back to the fundamental one, which is that it costs money and costs huge amounts of money to deal with it. So let's put this in another perspective. When you have a country that doesn't care about protecting its borders, that has to deal with a years-long wait list for asylum claims, that triggers government spending, and when you don't have the money budgeted, that triggers a deficit, which triggers debt, and we're back to square one with looking at what for 2017 was a $632 billion debt load. And then as the debt gets bigger, the percentage of your budget that you have to spend maintaining your debt gets bigger, which means less money to spend on border security, on policing, on the CBSA, on all of these other things. So every other government failing, where government is either spending money inefficiently or overspending or not caring about how much it spends, comes back to the debt issue, which then makes it so there's less money to spend on all of these other things. And I realize this sounds very circular, and I'm not trying to just get you to glaze over as I talk about numbers and debt to GDP ratios and all of this. But we all, and Thomas in the chat here, Thomas Prince says we all suffer. We do. We all suffer. That's immigration. The same is true of healthcare. I mean, if you don't take public health concerns seriously, if the government is going to deliver healthcare, you're going to spend more money in the long run on healthcare, which you don't have money for if you're spending on maintaining your debt. So I think debt should sway how people vote. But Canadians are also so bogged down and so beaten down by the things that are impacting them on a more direct basis, like a carbon tax that you see, and like potholes that you see aren't fixed, and hospital wait times that you see, and unemployment that you see, that it becomes very difficult to get Canadians to care about the much bigger issues that seem abstract, even if they are more directly related to what you're going through. So again, I don't know what the silver bullet is here in how we get the debt looked after. And I think that one component would be a balanced budget. Now remember, a balanced budget doesn't mean you're going to be debt-free, because you could budget in spending. I mean, you could budget in, taking out debt. But having a balanced budget and keeping that budget balanced for years in a row would at the very least bring it more into alignment, because people would see it. People would see it more. Like there was a town not far from me called, well, a county, Essex County, which is down near Windsor, and they have zero debt. It's a county that has zero debt. They paid it off. I think it was in 2014 or so. And it was just, it was 2014. And I remember interviewing on my radio show at the time the warden of Essex County, and I said, okay, let's face it, you're Essex County, you're not Toronto or Montreal or Vancouver. Do you think that your experience is different because you're a rural county compared to what bigger cities or provinces or the country would see? And his perspective was, look, if you look at the decisions we made and we had to make, this is something that any government could do. It's just not easy, and you actually have to really buckle down and do it. And it's not going to be natural. You have to tighten your belt, but it's possible for any government level. And I remember interviewing local politicians at the time, and I said, look, they've done it, can you? And all I got from, these were city councilors, were excuses of, oh, well, yes, but this isn't the year to do it. And, when the economy's bad, you don't want to rein in your spending because, people need the spending. And when the economy's good, you don't want to because, oh, it could get bad. And there's never a good time to politicians to actually rein in their spending. They never want to. They're never going to. And again, this started, if you're just tuning in, with a report from CIBC that they do every year that found that the top financial priority for average everyday Canadians was paying down debt. The top priority for politicians is always giving out money like they're Oprah Winfrey every day of the year. And let's just do a little bit of a flashback here. You may remember in 2015, Justin Trudeau was running the election against Stephen Harper, and he was talking about how he was going to balance the budget the next year. He said the budget was going to be balanced. There was going to be nothing that was going to happen as far as the deficit goes. And then it became a little itty-bitty deficit. And that was the one Stephen Harper made fun of in the election when he was talking about that itty-bitty deficit, so small you can't see it. And I think it was probably within a couple of years that Canadians started to wake up to the possibility that, maybe, just maybe, this budget isn't getting balanced. And then in November, we finally got the proof that everyone pretty much knew from Bill Morneau that not only will there be no balanced budget by October 2019, there's not going to be in the projections any balanced budget within sight. Even if the Liberals get reelected, there will not be, according to the Liberal government's projections, a balanced budget. And one thing that I would love to see, and I know these are kind of contentious, but one thing that I'd love to see is a balanced budget law, and a law that actually binds lawmakers to balance the budget, something that they are forced to find a way to balance. Now, the problem with this is that you'd love for governments to have a bit more latitude and flexibility to make the right decisions themselves. But it's safe to say they're not doing that. They're not making the right decisions. They're not making the smart decision. So if you put on the books a balanced budget law, it might make a little bit of a tricky time if you are in a recession. It also could do, and this is the downside of it, is that governments would want to spend all this money and they'd have to say, oh, well, you know, we don't have the money to do this, so we've got to balance the budget, so let's raise taxes. If you don't want to cut spending and you have to balance the budget, the only other thing you can do is raise taxes. But at least then it's being done transparently, because that's the only way to do it. Right now, you get governments that just shift money around, and they put basically any number they can anywhere they need to make it look like they're doing a lot better, which is why whenever a government takes office, they say, we looked at the books from the last 4 years and have no idea what was going on there. A message from Andrea that I wanted to read here. She writes, actually, I have no idea what she writes because my screen just disappeared. There we go. She says, I may have no debt, but my husband and I work very hard to keep things that way. She continues that if one of us is lacking money, austerity measures are made. If the government wanted to pay down debt, they could, but instead politicians are more interested in buying votes. Yeah, and that is so key, Andrew, and I thank you for saying that, because the fact is always going to be that you can do it. It just becomes harder and harder when you have all of these things on your wish list. And to go back to things that I learned when I was running as a candidate, people would say, as I told you, yes, I support balanced budgets, and yes, I want to get rid of spending that's too high, and yes, I want to pay down the debt, and yes, I want to do all this, but they also are so easily bought by things. And there was one great story. If I've told it, well, tough luck, I'm telling it again, but I don't think I've told it on a Facebook Live, where I was knocking on doors in a very, well, I shouldn't say very, fairly affluent neighborhood, upper middle class area, and meeting some really nice people. And I think we came very close in this polling district. And this woman said, yeah, you know, I'm thinking of voting PC or NDP, which right then and there shows you how, and I was in an NDP-held riding, but shows you how people can be very fickle sometimes, that the conservatives and the socialists are the two options. And I said to her, okay, what do you care about? She said, well, you know, government spending and healthcare and hydro and all the things that everyone was saying. I said, okay, cool. And she's like, well, I got to be honest with you. The NDP is offering free dental care, and I kind of like that idea. And I said, yeah, look, I think I understand as well. Dental care is expensive. I know why it's palatable for people to want it to be free. I said, but the question is, who's going to pay for it? And this woman, an educated family woman in a nice house in a nice neighborhood, I say, yeah, how are we going to pay for it? She said, oh, I never thought of that. And it was as though asking how a government program was going to be paid for was like the first time she had ever even imagined that a government program had to be paid for. And this is where, unfortunately, a lot of Canadian voters are. That you can talk about all of these different things, but when push comes to shove, people like the giveaway. And conservative governments are just as bad about this. Stephen Harper loved the boutique tax credits, the tax credits that were very populist in nature, people looking and saying, yes, that's my family that benefits, whether it's child fitness tax credit or something like that. Whereas when you get someone that comes in and says, like what Maxime Bernier is saying, by the way, which is get rid of all tax breaks that are specifically targeted and just have a general flatter tax that's lower, You can't sell that to individual people because people love one that they can claim. Everyone loves checking off boxes on your tax return that when you check those boxes, you feel like, you know, just you are getting a little goodie just for being you. So what I'm trying to get people to do here is understand that the realities that you deal with in your household finances are the same as the realities that the government is dealing with. But you as a Canadian have to start putting a lot more pressure on the government to make the decisions that you would have to in your household or in your business. The government, if the government were being run in the private sector right now, it would be so far from solvent and so far from profitable and so far from success. Do you honestly think you could take the government's books, the government of Canada's books, go on Dragon's Den, and I don't know who's on Dragon's Den right now. It changes over a lot. But I don't know if you could go to whoever's on Dragon's Den and be like, all right, here's my business. You know, here's my my net worth, and here's our net debt, and here's our spending. And do you think you could get them to invest $1 in your company if your company was Canada? No, you couldn't. There's no way. There is no business case for Canada right now. And lawmakers have allowed that problem to get bigger and bigger by refusing to do the decision-making that is required to bring our economy into order. And Justin Trudeau made some very clear and decisive promises 4 years ago that he was going to balance the budget. That hasn't happened. The implication is that getting the debt in check was going to be a priority. That hasn't happened. Lowering spending has not happened. Justin Trudeau has never met a tax hike he didn't like. This is a guy who looks at the hardworking small business owners who are making better financial decisions than he and Bill Morneau are and calls them tax cheats. This is what Justin Trudeau's approach to the economy is. So when you look at the average Canadian right now and see the challenges that they're facing, let's start extrapolating some of those to the bigger scale. And we've all seen, I mean, these have been circulating in email forwarding chains for like 15 years now. These decisions that, you know, if you were to take the government debt and reduce it down to a household level, there was one great example of this. He was in the US, and I think it was back in 2009. And what had happened was he took thousands and thousands of pennies, and each penny represented however many millions or billions of whatever it was. And he had his living room full of these. And he said, you know, this is the government spending right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how much the government is cutting as far as spending. And he picked up one penny and a pair of wire cutters, and he like took out a quarter of it or 3/4 of it. And it was a great thing. And Matthias Shapiro was his name. And I actually saw a data visualization workshop where he didn't teach me how to say data visualization. There we go. I got it. Data visualization. A workshop he did where he was talking about that. And this may be the answer to that question I raised earlier of how do you get Canadians to care about it, to really let them visualize how bad the problem is. So we know Maxime Bernier is pretty solid on this issue. He wants to get rid of boutique tax credits, lower corporate taxes, lower personal taxes, get rid of corporate welfare, balance the budget. We know where Andrew Scheer is on this issue in a more theoretical way, but I would love for Andrew Scheer to come out swinging on this and say, yeah, this is what we as a country need to do. This is how we're going to do it, and this is why it's important. And to not fall into the trap of every politician before him, which is to think that you need to win the election by giving things away. You have to see someone who's prepared to change that. And as much as it's tempting, because yes, there are going to be people that would love the giveaway and love nothing more than the giveaway, that is not going to be the way that we get the country back on track. And in fact, if we have politicians on all stripes, of all stripes, that just decide to do that, then even when a conservative-minded one wins, it's not going to make a difference because all they're doing is just putting different types of credits and giveaways in compared to what the Liberals are putting in. So that's going to be where, if I'm going to make a New Year's resolution for 2019, that's where I'd love for the country to take this right now, to start demanding of politicians a lot more fiscal restraint and to start expecting government to behave the way that your own business has to and the way that your own household has to. Because if you have to, there's no reason they shouldn't as well. To go back to what I said at the beginning of this, government that is democratically elected should be a reflection of the demographics that it's representing. And right now it's not, because it's not a reflection of anything that's economically sound or viable. That's it for me. I'm going to be back with more Facebook Excellence next week, and we'll have lots of videos between now and then. Hope you're having, again, a great New Year's week, a post-New Year's week, whatever you call it. I look forward to spending some more time with family in the next couple days and more time with you in the next year. Thanks very much, Canada. Thank you. God bless, and have a great day.